Let's begin with our writers. First of all, thank you for sharing your narrative pieces with the class. Let's talk about why you chose that piece, why you think it's a good example of the genre, and how did the piece you chose meet the assignment expectations?
I chose this piece because it was something that was meaningful to me, something that I thought would match the assignment, but also I thought it has a visual element, so I thought that might be interesting to introduce. And I think I probably on some level I did want to get some feedback, though it took a while for me to fully realize that.
Clint?
I picked the piece because it's one of the short stories that I've done before that's gotten the most positive feedback from very different audiences. And so I was interested to see what an audience of instructors would say to it. Plus, I selected it because it really anchors the story in time. It's predominantly in scene, and that's one thing that I think is really important with the genre, and so I thought it represented that aspect of the assignment really well.
Well, one other thing that occurred to me with my assignment too is that I remember thinking that I wanted to be able to give an example of narrative writing where you can be in the moment, but you can and recount specific things in the moment, but then also connect to other texts, other experiences, and to kind of demonstrate that it doesn't have to be one specific event, or that it can branch out into other areas, I guess.
And it doesn't have to be strictly chronological or, adhere to other traditional structures.
Yeah.
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 It's reflective.
Yes.
And what kind of feedback did you hope to receive?
I'll take that one first. Because this is a story that I'd revised a number of times before, largely I was just looking to see where readers were at, what they got from the story at different points. There were some specific things that I was looking for, like there are a few points where I switched tense. I switched from past into present tense intentionally, and I just wanted to see how noticeable that was. But overall, especially when I have a story that I think is fairly polished, I'm most interested in just where are my readers at, where's their interest increasing, what kicks them out of the story, that type of feedback.
So Clint, what was the original context of your story? Like, why did you write it? And
well, the original context was actually for a contest. It was writing for a contest that was sponsored by Dave Wolverton, who's a New York Times best-selling writer. And so I originally wrote the story to take place within a world that Wolverton had created, and I decided that I was going to tell a mythological story from within this fictional world. And so after the story, I did some revisions to make it more kind of my own, and it was that repurposed story that I used for this.
okay. And Ron, what kind of feedback did you hope to receive, and what was your original context when you wrote it?
My original context was much less exciting. I was just posted it on a blog that colleagues and friends had read, and so I got a pretty positive reaction when I posted. But these are people who knew me and had read a lot of stuff from me. So I think part of me was wondering how would people outside of that kind of circle respond, and how would they engage it. So I was curious to see how people would respond, and if I was able to make I knew I was talking about something very specific about someone who had been a runner and who had shifted a very specific activity. That would I be able to connect with people who don't have similar experiences and don't know me as well.
All right. For our reviewers, what was going through your mind as you gave feedback to these various pieces?
Well, as I gave feedback to Clint, I was thinking that I don't teach fiction, and I rarely teach narrative, except for in the Online Plus, so that I was a peer reviewer, but a peer feeling as anxious as maybe some other peer reviewers might feel. Like, what do I know about this? I'm not very expert on this. How can I respond? so we were all in the situation of being peers talking to each other. And though I read a lot, I don't teach, this particular form. So my strategy was to say, okay, I'll read it to see first, within the context of the assignment, how it's structured, whether I can follow it. Are there any places that make me stop and confuse me? So you read first that way, and I was marking those areas. There weren't any, maybe one or two. But that was my issue because of my familiarity with the genre. And then I decided that the best thing I could do was to describe my experience reading the story, because people who write fiction want to know how they're affecting their audiences emotionally and intellectually as well. So that's what I did. I mean, I tried to respond to, here's what I think is happening. This is really good. This stopped me for a little bit. Here's what I thought really, was really helpful to me as a reader, or exciting. And here's ultimately what I realized at the end of my reading experience. So that was my move, to respond in that way, more than to say do this or do that or consider revising in this way, because I didn't feel myself as in instructor mode, more as in response mode, which I think is important when you're reviewing your peers' work.
I've also reviewed Clint's, and I think I would echo some of the same feelings that I don't review and give feedback on fiction very often, and so that heightened maybe my anxiety a little bit, not feeling as expert as maybe I would normally feel, whatever that means. And
Practiced, maybe.
Practiced,
Yeah.
practice, yes, practice. And then I have to admit that, for me, Clint's stories it immediately felt familiar because I've read sci-fi stories, fantasy stories that are kind of like that. And that's one of the things I commented on. But I actually don't like that type of story. Like Neil Gaiman has a lot of stuff like that too, and I don't. So I was right off the bat kind of like, no, I don't. So how do I engage this? And so I tried to focus on the genre elements, and I didn't really engage it personally.
But I chose to provide responses that I hoped would help you revise, given the expectation that you wanted to take this piece and move it along, whether it's to reach another audience or to explain things that maybe I misunderstood in the text. So whenever I wrote comments, or for the most part when I wrote comments, I would preface it with, I think you should, or maybe you should try this, so that at the end of the day you'd feel like you had some autonomy over what you've written. And then also in my comments, which I think might have pushed people a bit back, and found a bit, maybe a little harsh or stringent, were the times when I maybe point out things that were things I would comment on if I were writing a literary analysis, like this idea of how rational you were in this natural environment. I thought would make a really great paper, but maybe wasn't something that you knew to know right then as you were revising the paper and kind of understanding my initial comments.
I think anytime we review a paper, we hear students say all the time, I'm in 1010, what right do I have to be reviewing someone's paper? I came here to improve my writing, and you're asking me to give feedback. And I kind of felt that same way when I'm reading Ron's paper and giving feedback, because I'm thinking, well, this piece is really important to Ron, and what am I going to say about it? And
which I have to say, that's really fascinating to me, given you have a ton of experience as a teacher and as a writer.
But I think
that's
that
really interesting to me.
Anxiety is there, whether you're a first-year writing student or you're, you teach writing. It's because it's, a peer relationship. And one thing that I think is valuable is just maybe to look at a piece as a practice audience would. And so when I kind of got over my initial anxiety over it, I thought, I'm just going to react to this piece. I'm going to go through it, because the first time I read it, I'm like, well, what am I going to say? But the second time I read it, I thought I'm going to react to that, and I'm going to let Ron know my experiences, where I was confused, what I liked, what I connected with, and maybe what could be clarified.
I think it's interesting, this idea of a pressure to perform, even as a reviewer, that you have to give somebody something that they can actually use to better their piece, or at least to re-examine it, to look at it through another lens. That's definitely how I felt, maybe to the point where I wrote too many comments and it became very overwhelming, and even so much that my students would comment that I didn't really enjoy Kenna's comments because she didn't let the text breathe. And I thought, fair enough, okay. Maybe I was looking out more for me and showing that I was a skilled and critical reader than kind of thinking and taking into consideration how Ron would experience or read my comments.
Well, and also, I mean, students themselves different in terms of the kinds of comments they like or the kinds of feedback, as Kenna, as you pointed out. So some people like fewer comments and more pointed ones, and if they have too many, they feel as if they're being bullied or overwhelmed. And some people like just the opposite. So we can never know what every single writer would like, but at least this opens up the conversation as to students being able to let us know, you know, what they prefer, what they need, and what's working, and that we should be able to say that to each other, you know, student to student and student to instructor.
And I think one common technique when you choose to peer review each other is to ask prior to that peer review, what are you looking for? What type of feedback would you like to receive on this document? And well, at least in this scenario, we didn't receive any kind of comments on what writers would want to see concerning peer reviews or any set questions that we should respond to. So it's kind of carte blanche where you could write whatever you wanted to. And I guess I should have kind of self-edited at some point when my comments, you know, extended to another page. I don't know.
When they were longer than the original piece.
I think at the same time, though, having a lot of comments is really helpful. And especially I think it's important to know that as a writer, you own that paper. That's your paper. So, you know, if you've got a lot of comments to choose from, then you choose, okay, yes, I love this comment. No, this doesn't really affect what I'm trying to get at, but I appreciate that feedback. So at the end of the day, I think you just need to smile and nod your head and say, well, thank you for your peer review, and then you, as a writer, start deciding which comments that you're using.
And the amount of comments, I think, is interesting. That's rhetorical in of itself, right? I mean, and students commented, the ones that have looked at our feedback on the writing, some were overwhelmed and said, you know, let it breathe, but some were really impressed, and some were okay with how I responded to Clinton's text, and some said, boy, you didn't say anything for like 3 pages. I don't even think you read it. So, I mean, that idea that it does communicate something, we should be aware of how much we're commenting and what that means.